Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. In today's video, I'm going to be Copic coloring the Whimsy Stamps Dreamy Dragon digital stamp set. This guy is so darling and he is perfect for trying out very simple techniques like the texture on this guy's body and the detail that I added to the wings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a few moments. I do have this printed out on Express at blending card. This is cut down to 8 inches by 8 inches, and I do have this at 150% of the default size. You could easily put this on a card front, and that would be fabulous as well. I'm going to be starting with my Copic in G29. This is going to be my darkest shade color, and I'm just getting that color up along his back, right behind his head, here underneath his little snout. I also need to add some shading in between those toes that are up underneath his little face there. Those would have quite a bit of shadow casted in there, although I want you to note how much white space I have left on those feet just yet. I am going to be pushing those a little bit darker, but I'll talk about that here more in a moment. I also needed that G29 up underneath his leg there, and here on his belly, I'm not going to add too much of it there because I don't want to push this too dark. I do want to make him look like he's laying flatter on that branch, but I don't need to go terribly dark in order to do that. Plus, I have another trick that I'm going to be doing here shortly as well. Okay, so I also need to get his tail here, but I want to make his tail look like it has a little bit of movement to it. So it's kind of wavy. It's not laying like a flat lump on this branch. So I'm making sure that I'm only adding it to those areas that dip down in the illustration. And then I'll fill that in with my lighter colors as I go along, and you'll see how that turns out. Now I'm coming in with my Copic in G46. I'm going right over the top of that 29, and I'm coming out a little bit. There is just a tiny bit of white space left on the edge of those toes. They're not going to have a whole bunch of highlight there, so I am making sure that I'm not leaving a bunch of space there. Up underneath his chin, here along his back, and I want you to take note here how I've concentrated this G46 over that G29. I need to get to that G29 saturated again as I blend that out with the G46, so I get a smoother blend on it. Now at 150%, folks, this is one of those images that you need to make sure that you have plenty of ink in your marker, and you also need to make sure that you're working fairly efficiently. If you are allowing that ink to dry back, and if you don't have enough ink in those markers, then you're not going to get a very good blend, and it will be noticeable. Plus, if you decide to do the texture on his body like I'm going to do here in a few moments, you're going to need that extra ink in those markers. Otherwise, he's going to look like he has chicken pox instead of texture. Now I'm coming in with the G43, and I'm going to go right over the top of that G29 and that G46. And I'm going to bring this out, finish coloring this in. I want you to note that I am using mostly the side of my marker there, using a very nice long swish stroke in order to get that color on there. And then I'm just going to let the paper do its job for me. I can come back and make adjustments later if I need to, but for the time being, I have the color down. I know I have some good saturation here. I'm going to let it do the rest of the work for me. Now that I have the body done, I'm going to come down here and work on this foot that is hanging down behind the branch. That's actually going to have quite a bit of shadow in it. So I started with that G29 and filled in that top portion of it. Now I'm going to come in with the G46. I kind of leave this little jelly bean shape of white for that G43, but then I decided that it was a little too much. So I'm going to come back in with that G46 and kind of close in that space a little bit, and then I'll touch that up with the G43, and I'm going to call that good for now. Now I'm going to come up to his foot up here. I needed to get in between those toes. That toe that is furthest from us, that is going to actually have the most G29 on it. And I also made sure that I ran that G29 around the bottom side of his foot in a very fine, thin line with the tip of my marker, because I need it to get some shade in there and to make that look like it's further away from us. I brought in my G46. Now I'm going to finish this off with a G43, and I'm going to call that good. I did not, again, leave a whole lot of white space there for any highlights, even though that is closest to us. I will deal with more of that when I come in with my colored pencils. Now I'm going to start working on his head here, and I have the G29, and I'm For the most part, up on the tip of my marker, I am trying to hold it off to the side a little bit for you folks so you can see what I'm doing here. However, these are really, really fine details. And here in just a moment, I'm going to kind of hold this for a minute so you can get a really good look of what I've done with this G29. These are super fine details, so I need to make sure that I'm using that very, very tip of my marker in there so I'm not making any of that shade too fat and too dark. Otherwise, you're going to start losing some of those features. Again, once I'm done with the G29, I'm going to come in with the G46, go right over the top of that 29 and start blending that out. Now, this is one of those moments where I'm going to kind of work at this and build up to the level of shade that I want in here. So you're going to see that I start leaving myself quite a bit of white paper, but then I'll kind of come back to another area and fill that in just a little bit more. This cheek right here, I left too much white there, so I'm coming back in up here at the top of his head. I'm going to come back in and kind of fill in that space a little bit more along the left hand side of his face. I'm going to fill that in more because that would have quite a bit of shade to it. And then once I'm happy with that, I can come back with my G43 and I can finish filling that in. If you feel like you need to add any more of that G46, you certainly can. Just make sure that you're not going too dark on his face. You need to have some differentiation in those features and in order for him to look like he has a three-dimensional face. Now I'm going to work on the wings. I started with the G29 again on that wing that is furthest from us. I'm going to go right up against the one that is closest to us. This one here at the top, just a very thin line right along that edge there. Now I'll come in with the G46. I'm going to come about a third of the way down there. I'll finish off completely that back wing with the G46. That's the furthest away from us. It's not going to have any highlight to it. I will add just a portion of it here at the front of his wing with the G43 because I want to make it look like it's curving down towards our faces, or more towards his body. So it needs to have quite a bit more light in there. For his little belly, I'm coming in with the E43, and I'm just going right along the bottom there, plus where his leg is overlapping his body a little bit. And then I'm going to finish that off with a 41. I'm going to call that good. I can finish the rest of that detail with my colored pencils as soon as I get to that point. Also, if you would like to know more about how I did the texture on his body, you can see that over on Patreon, where I have a full-length real-time video showing how I do that, and I will have that link down below if you are interested in that. Now I'm going to get started on his wings, and I'm going to use the same colors on the bottom half of his wings as I did for his belly. I'm coming in with that E43, going right up next to the green portion of the wing, bringing that down just a little bit on that left-hand side. I will start at the bottom and work my way up with the E43 as well because I need some shade in there. It's kind of curving away from his body down in there, so I need to get some of that in there. I'm also going to finish this off with the E41 just like I did with his belly. There isn't a whole lot of shade in here, guys, so we don't need to go too light with it. Plus, I'm going to be adding some detail with my colored pencils later on, and again, I will talk about that when the time comes. I'm going to finish off his little feet with the same colors. Gotta be honest, folks, I rode the struggle bus on his feet. I thought I would leave his little pads in a lighter color. At the end of the day, I didn't like it, so I came in and finished that off with the E41 anyway. I'm going to do the spikes on his head and his back with the same colors as his belly, feet, and wings. Started with that E43, coming in with the E41. Going to finish filling that in, but I'm going to take this E41 up over the top of that portion of the spike that is hanging over his head, and then I'll finish that off with the E40. That's going to have quite a bit of light hitting it, so I need to keep that a little bit lighter, but where it's folded over onto itself up underneath there is going to have quite a bit of shade, so that area gets the 43 and the 41, and I finish off all the rest of those just the same. But again, if you want to see how all of that works out, you can check that out over on Patreon. So now I'm going to start coloring in this branch here. I'm going to start with the E29, and I'm only going to show you a portion of this branch because I take the same approach for the entire thing, and I'm going to do this in sections. I have the E29, and I'm going right in where the knots are illustrated and up underneath his body. I want to push this pretty dark. Now I'm holding my marker a little off to the side there so you can see. Typically I would hold it right up there on the tip so I could get some finer, clean cleaner lines in here, but this will work just fine. When I'm done with the E29, I'll come in with the E25. I'm going to start filling in this space as I proceed to the next color. With the E25, I'm going to go right over that 29, bring it out a little bit, and you can see that I'm kind of moving back and forth across that E29 with the 25 to kind of break that down a little bit. I'm not scrubbing. I just kind of swish back and forth a little bit so I can see where that 29 starts to break down just a tiny bit, and then I will move on. When I'm done with that 25, I come in with the 23, go right over the top of the 29 and the 25, start bringing that out a little bit more. Now, I am leaving quite a bit of white space to finish off with my E21, and I will come back in when I'm done coloring in this entire branch and make some adjustments with my E23 to kind of fill that in and push this branch just a wee bit darker. I talk about that in more detail over on Patreon if you're interested in learning about that. Now, I will say when it comes to branches like these, because they are illustrated with all of those lines and the grooves and the bends and the folds, don't overthink this. Just kind of go with it. If your eye is telling you I need to put some shadow in there, then definitely, by all means, put some shadow in there. If you feel like you're afraid of going too dark, then skip that E29, go with the 25 and the 23. That being said, you definitely need to have the same level of color in this branch that you do in the dragon. Otherwise, they're not going to look cohesive, and you need to have them look cohesive. At the end of the day, our dragon here is our hero image. However, that branch is an extension of the dragon. So they're both equally important, and they both need to have that same level of color in them in order for them to look right. So just keep that in mind. Overall, branches like these are really easy. Most of the work is already illustrated for you, so should be easy peasy. Okay, so for my flowers here, I'm going to start with this yellow flower. I'm coming in with the Y21, and I'm going right down there at the base of that flower, plus up along the edge where the petals overlap one another. Coming in with a Y11, and then I'm going to finish this off with the Y00. I'm actually just taking a moment to push some of that brown Copic out of those flowers, and that's another reason why I colored that branch before the flowers, in case I got any in there, because these flowers are just tiny. On the magenta flowers, I have an RV66. I went right around the center of that. And then I'm going to come in with an RV55, and then I'll finish this off with an RV63. There is a lot to be desired on my Copic coloring on these little magenta flowers. However, I do come back in and I fix that later with my colored pencils. For the white flowers, I used a BV25 and a BV23, and I did those just like I had done the magenta flowers. Now I'm ready to start bringing in my colored pencils. I'm going to use the indigo blue right where I had any of this G29 on this dragon. Then I'm going to come in with a Prussian green, go over the top of that and bring that out just a little bit, for the most part, into that zone where I had that G46. I have a very sharp pencil and an extremely light hand here, folks. These are dark colors by nature anyways, but also I'm trying not to destroy any of that texture that I put in there. So if I go in with too heavy of a pencil or too heavy of a hand, then I'm going to lose all of that texture, and I don't want to do that. The whole point was to have a textured dragon, so I need to be really careful here. I can keep going back and forth and building up color as I go. I don't need to go in with a heavy hand to begin with. Otherwise, again, I'm just going to lose that. I am making sure that I'm getting the detail in these little toes here, so I have a really sharp pencil so I can get those lines nice and clean, nice and tight in there, so I can get the separation in those toes, get that shadow pushed back there even further without going terribly dark. I had already done that foot once before, and now I'm coming back in and added just another layer of it, and then I can call that good. Right up underneath his little leg here, I want to push that back a little bit further since it's underneath his head. Here it is armpit. I'm going to push that back a little bit further. And here it is leg. I'm going to push that back further as well. I will just keep taking a look at this as I go along, and I'll ask myself if I need to add any more color or if I'm happy with it just the way it is. even though I'm not pushing on it, I don't want to go too dark in most of these areas anyways, because I still have a green dragon. And if I go too dark, I'm going to start losing some of that vibrancy that's in his body. So I need to make sure that I'm paying attention to how dark I go in some of those areas anyway. I need to get right up underneath his tail here where it starts to separate from his body. I'm going to make sure that I get it up along the edge of his tail here, especially where I want to push that area further back. You can see where by pushing this further back, it makes his tail look like it's kind of wavy. So I have those higher points that are lighter, those lower points that are darker. So it's not just laying flat on this branch here. Plus, when I do the colored pencil work on the branch itself, it's going to separate that much more from the branch. It's going to look more three-dimensional. I need to make sure that I get his foot here. I'm going to push that pretty dark there. It is almost completely up underneath that branch, pretty far back there, so it's going to go fairly dark there. Now I'm going to start working on his head here, and this is where I'm going to start cleaning up some of those areas. This little fringe at the front of his head, I clean that up just very lightly with a very small amount of this indigo blue. Right along the top side of his head here, he's got like these two little hairs, I think, that are sticking up, so I made sure to add some there. Along this side of his face, now remember, this one is the furthest away from us, so we can push this fairly dark. You don't want to go too heavy, but you can go fairly dark. Let's get some color in that cheekbone, and then I'm going to make sure that I concentrate here on the details of the bridge of his nose and the nose itself. I want to make it look like he has a full snout here, so I need to push that further back at the very back. I also made sure that I outlined where his nostrils come up, or the inside of them, so they look like, so it looks like you can see up his nose. So I made sure to add some of the indigo blue there. Once I'm done with that, I come in with a Prussian green. On that Prussian green right there on the front of his snout, I just brought that up a little bit, again, and kind of in that jelly bean shape to make it look like it was indented a little bit, so he didn't have a flat snout. There was a little bit of movement in there. And just like the rest of his body, I'm just going to go back and forth and very lightly add this color as I go along here and kind of build it up until I'm happy with it. I'm also going to make sure that I get down into these feet here. I love the detail in his little feet sticking out from underneath his face, so I definitely wanted to make sure that I paid special attention to that so you could actually see the separation in his toes, because I think they are just darling. It makes me think of a cat. I totally think of my cat when I think of this dragon. All right, so now I'm coming into his body just like I have done, going over the top of that indigo blue, bringing that out a little bit. I'm making sure that I'm not going into any area that I had at that G43. Going over the top of that G43 with the Prussian green is going to push that way too dark. You're absolutely going to see that Prussian green over the top of it, and you don't want to do that. You're going to see, it'll look like pencil marks. It will push it too dark, and it will just simply ruin the coloring all together. So definitely make sure that you're not going into any of that area with that G43. Also, I talk about this more over on Patreon, but do be sure when you're doing images like this that you are still grounding them. Now, technically, this guy is up in the air, so it would look like he has some sky behind him, and I did do a very sketchy style of sky back behind him, but make sure that you're doing that, because otherwise it's just going to look like it's floating out in the middle of nowhere. It's not going to make sense, and overall, it's a really easy thing to do, but it's also a really easy thing to forget. So make sure that you're doing that. And again, you can hear more about that over on my Patreon. Okay, so for his spikes, his wings, feet, and his belly, I'm going to come in with a Prismacolor in dark brown, and I'm going in any area where I would have had that E43. Then I'll come in with the Prismacolor in burnt ochre, and I'll go right over the top of that dark brown, and I'll bring that out to just a wee bit, not quite as much as where I had any of the E41. If I feel like I need to push an area back further yet, I will kind of come in just a tiny bit bit with the Prismacolor in dark purple. I don't use that too terribly much. The dark brown and the burnt ochre work just fine. I will ease some of these edges, like right here with the Prismacolor in the beige up next to that burnt ochre, just a tiny bit. It doesn't cover over the top of the burnt ochre. It just kind of knocks it back just a tiny bit. You're not going to get any specific blending here. Technically, colored pencils really don't blend, they layer. But by going over the top of that with the burnt ochre with the beige, it just kind of pushes that back, eases that edge just a little bit so it's not quite so stark and so harsh. I'm also going to take this beige to finish off this branch. I do have all of the colored pencil detail work over on Patreon, but I do want to show you here where you can add just simple highlights to certain shapes. You don't have to go all out. It doesn't always have to be white. Sometimes a really nice complementary color to the colors that you had used on your image will work even better than a white. So now that my dragon and my branch is done, now I can come in and work on these flowers. I have the Prismacolor in dark purple. I'm going right in where I had that RV66. Really sharp pencil, really light hand, and I'm just going to clean up those edges a little bit since these flowers were kind of small. My Copic work was a little sloppy, so now this is my opportunity to clean those up and make them look like legit flowers again. When I'm done with the dark purple, I'll come in with the mulberry, go right over the top of that dark purple and bring that out just a little bit. I kind of leave the edges just a tiny bit open without any colored pencil work on them so I can let that RV63 shine through. On these yellow flowers, I start with the grayed lavender where I had that Y21. Then I come in with the mineral orange over the top of that grayed lavender where I had the Y11. Bring that out just a little bit. I will finish these off with a yellow ochre, just a tiny bit, because I like the look of that yellow ochre over the top of the mineral orange and the grayed lavender. It just makes it that perfect darker yellow color. I dig it. This is generally my preferred color combination for this color of yellow, especially with flowers. To finish this guy off, I'm going to come in and stipple some Sakura Stardust shimmer pin across the top of his back, his wings, and his head, a little bit on his tail. I'm just kind of eyeballing this. I'm not overthinking this at all. Just kind of going with the flow here. The nice thing about this is if you make any mistakes, let it dry, and then you can come in with your eraser and erase that, and you won't even notice the difference. At this point, this is totally optional. You do not need to do this, but in my world, all fantasy creatures need to have some shimmer, so I definitely felt like it was worth it. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I have all of the products I used today linked down in the description below, as well as over on my blog, so do be sure to check that out. I hope you enjoyed my project today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.